Vanakkam, Madhusudhanan Kalaichelvan from Semmozhi Multimedia Center. The Silappatikaram series, the story of the anklet by Ilango Vadigal. In the previous episode, we discussed how Madhavi's residence became Kovalans also and how Kannagi was let alone to suffer all by herself. The next chapter, Ilango, talks about the great festival of Indhira, a major celebration in the city of Poompuhar. Tamil Sangam literature classifies the landscape into 5 different backgrounds. It talks about how each of the landscape settlement had its own qualities and attributes. It talks about the primary gods who were patronized by the majority people of that particular landscape, the kind of festivals that were celebrated, the food, primary food and music and dance and water bodies, flowers, seasons, all of this were unique to the landscape. Here we are talking about a coastal town, but it is also more like a very happening and a wealthy town. It is a port town, so it's on the coast, but not to forget that Poompuhar, or the city where all of this is happening, is exactly where Kaveri, the river, the precious river, the sacred river of south of India, reaches the eastern coast. So it is kind of an agricultural setup majorly on the coast. So it's a mix of both. So here Indhira, who is associated with bountiful monsoons, which is also the reason of good agricultural produce, who is patronized by majority of the population there, is to be celebrated. Indhira is celebrated in the month of Chittirai, which also coincides with the end of the spring season and setting up of the summer season. So in that transition, they are going to celebrate the festival of Indhira. But Ilango uses this theme for a better reason. Till now, he has declared the wealth of, or described the wealth of Poompuhar city and the wealthy merchants and the nature's gift that the city was. All this has been discussed. But the town, the city of Poompuhar, its citadels, the city squares, the junctions there, the kind of people who occupied different parts of the city, they have not yet been discussed. So the opening verses of this chapter is used purposefully by Ilango, the poet, to describe the city of Puhar. He talks about how well planned the city was. Now, the previous chapter was about the evening times. Now, this chapter opens with setting up of the sun. So, that is the contrast that he gives. We discussed about how the nights are getting lengthy and how it is a challenge for Kannagi, who is alone, to spend the night. So, that theme of the previous chapter comes to a close with the sun rising up the horizons. So, the opening verses of this chapter talks about the sunrise and how the sun went about casting his bright light all over the city of Puhar. Poompuhar is the name of the city and it is very wealthy. So wealthy that it could afford a good, efficient planner to design the city. Urban planning is a direct remark of how well civilized a particular dynasty or the period or in time the people were. We talk a lot about the urban planning traditions of the Sindhu Saraswati civilization. So, it is a direct contrast, indirect evaluation of a dynasty, a civilization. It's about its urban planning, how well and how efficient the cities back then were. So, here again Poompuhar is very well planned and it is an efficient working city. It talks about broad streets, streets that met at junctions and how the traffic could flow easily. It talks about demarcated regions within the city where people practicing different professions had occupied. It talks about Pattinam Pakkam and Maruvur Pakkam. It splits the whole landscape into two. It talks about how one side it is all the commercial ventures. It's closer to the ocean, and then there is another side which is more so for people who are practicing different art forms and different industries that were set. It talks about how the city had places demarcated for different professions and grouped them together. There are streets which were occupied by wealthy businessmen practicing trades which were pretty wealthy too. The investment was pretty heavy, and that includes expensive perfumery, fragrances, gold, jewelry, people who traded with pearls and corals and emeralds and rubies. So, these were the kind of people who were really wealthy, and their office spaces and their residential places will in fact reflect their housing also. So, the huge mansions that they had with wide balconies and corridors, balconies that were projecting, all of these were grouped together. Now, till date, whether we like it or not, this is exactly how real estate works. So, planning happens in a way that the housing solutions that you give are grouped by the cost tag. So, here again, people who could afford really huge mansions were more the people who were trading with very expensive commodities like gold and diamonds and gemstones and whatnot. So, they were all housed together. Then you had streets which were connecting them and running in a gridiron pattern. You have the next set of people who were into other forms of art like tailors, cobblers, tanners, potters, blacksmiths, goldsmiths, people who were specialized in boring hole inside precious gems. So, they were all grouped together. These are all certainly very essential professions, no doubt about it, but the finances with which they transact is much low compared to the previous setting. So, they were all grouped together. These were also art forms, and it was more so with their warehouses and the yards where they practice their profession. And some profession might need a furnace, some profession might need water coolers. So, depending on what they needed, they were all grouped together. This is also in a way very efficient because such resources, practicing places, laboratories could be shared between them, between business person. So, that way here you have these people who were grouped together based on their needs, and so that's a very interesting way of urban planning too. And Silappatikaram talks about the efficiency, the functional efficiency of Pumbuhar, because such classification was prevailing. So, the next row of professional practices involved these kind of art forms, the potters, the blacksmiths, people who were into tailoring, cobblers, they were all there. And then you had street hawkers too, people who made a wage by hawking on streets. They sold bathing powders, they sold paints, they sold such commodities too. So, they were on the streets with portable exhibits that they could carry which had these commodities and selling it off, or they made their own shops right in front of major ones over the platforms, had a carpet on which they had exhibited their goods and they were selling it. So, these were the contrasting professions that they all practiced and based on which they worked. So, the housing was based on the profession. All of this happened in a place called Maruvur Pakkam. Then you had slightly educated professions. You had the priests who had mastered the Vedas and the Shastras. So, they were all there housed together. Then you had the astrologers. That was equally demanding a profession. You are supposed to master the Shastras, you are supposed to master astrology, astronomy, weather seasons, predict the rains. So, they were highly regarded too. So, they were into such professions, though they were all grouped together. Then you had the medical practitioners, people who practiced medicine, people who knew about the herbs, people who produced medicines and they were selling it, people who were attending to the physically needed people, the people who needed assistance, people who met with accidents. So, they were all there. There were people who mastered in curing venom, curing getting bitten by snakes and scorpions, people who could protect such people from accidents. So, they were all there. This was another group. And then you had women who were dancers, musicians. These were also art forms, but more so a learned art form, slightly classical. So, they were there. Then you had people who practiced less popular instruments like the drums and trumpets. So, they were grouped together. So, this way it was completely based on profession, and each profession demanded a way of life. Each profession needed a place where they could practice their trade. Some occasions you needed warehouses. So, it was dependent on the profession. These were on two ends. You had the Maruvur Pakkam and Pattinam Pakkam. Right in the center was a huge open space which looked like a battleground facing each other. Two of the troops, the military troops of two different dynasties, two different governments, two different kings could be parked. But it was not used as a battlefield, though it was vast, it was huge. It was more so for the markets, people who could come and sell their products. And even within the markets, they had the tradition of both day markets and night markets. Now, these are the interesting details that we get. Some goods are to be sold by day, groceries, sweets, meat. These are all the goods that you sell in the broad daylight. Their need is by the day. So, people who needed them could come, buy them, trade off and go back home and use it and consume it for the day. So, such products were sold by the daytime. And then as the day sets, they wrap up their business, they close their shops, they retire for the day, and as opposed to what was being sold in the daytimes, the night markets come alive. So, they are more so selling goods that found purpose in the night times. They sold perfumes, they sold dresses, garments, they sold sandalwood, they sold sweetmeat, they sold evening snack items, muffins. These are all sold in the night market. So, you have these two markets also, one that was functioning by the day and the other that was functioning by the night. It was called as the Nalangadi and Allangadi, the day market and the night market. Even today in several old towns, we can see how the very popular market streets which sells branded and retail goods in well kept shops close down for the evening and make way for the night shopping. And those are the shops that just comes up alive in the night times. They are not fixed establishments. Wherever the shopkeeper finds place, he just sets up a shop and starts selling his goods. So, that is more like the night market. So, depending on what is procured, who comes out to buy, the day and the night markets, both of them were quite active and popular there. So, this is also an interesting contrast that Ilangovadigal brings in. So, he talks about the city, the various professions that were practiced, the road laying pattern and more. As if all of this is not enough, Ilango talks about 5 very interesting altars. These were not functioning temples for popular gods, but these were acting more so as prayer spots. People with need could come there and pray. These were more so open venues, arenas, where a deity was invoked, and in most cases these deities were fiery. There was the image of a pavai or imagery of a girl which was installed and worshipped, more probably a terracotta image of a girl who was installed and worshipped. She was possessed, and so it had life in it, but it will not talk, it cannot listen to your prayers, it might not fetch you anything for having prayed, but the purpose was much higher. Whenever the king who delivers justice delineates or moves away from justice, this particular doll or the image there starts weeping. So, Pavai Mandram, as it was called, was a stage on which an imagery of a woman was established, installed and worshipped, not for any ordinary prayers, but as a sign of a just king. Whenever there was injustice in the king's activities, his thoughts or deeds or words, this particular image of the girl will start weeping. That is to alert the people that justice isn't prevailing anymore. That is more so to caution us, to tell us, watch out, it is not right what is happening. So, this is a very interesting setup which was in practice there. Then you have another stage which installed a large tall stone, Nedunkal Kundram or Nedunkal Mandram as it was called, was a stage on which a monolithic stone which was sharp and tall, rising all the way up, was installed. And people made offerings there, went around it and prayed. And then there was a very mystic water body. People who suffered from ailments people whose hands or legs were twisted or crippled, people who had grown a hunchback, if they follow the rules, come and take a dip in that water body, it served as a cure. It was a remedy and it brought back life. So, these were very interesting discussions or descriptions of such mystic shrines. The fourth was a Bhuta, a very fiery Bhuta who protected a junction. The image of this particular Bhuta was installed with hands that would move when in need. What was the purpose of this Bhutam? It stood for anything that was a false. It stood for people who were dubious sages, people who acted to be very wise and saintly were crushed to death by this Bhutam. It gets its life invoked when people of that sort come in front of it. The hands would start moving and so would the legs. The Bhutam would actually walk, reach out to the person, hold on to him, crush him to death. Women who cheated upon their husbands, men who stood for a witness that was dubious, ministers who worked inappropriately were all caught by this Bhutam and they were crushed to death. Now, that is an interesting way to make sure that people in power were just and behaving well. Then there is this fifth and the last special altar, which was an open ground where bundles of goods were kept together with the weight, the value and the name of the owner written on it. A lot of import and export was happening and these were open warehouses. Back in those days, they could only protect so much. When in need, invocation of gods who could protect, who could come in and stand secure your goods, they could be brought into. So, here we have such gods who were invoked in this open warehouse. The protection of the goods were dutied on them. So, they were invisible gods who would invoke their presence when in need. So, when a thief walks in thinking that there is nobody guarding these valuable goods, manages to pick them up, and if he thinks he can slip away, he would be intercepted by these invoked forms of gods, protective gods, catch hold of him and force him to carry all the weight on his head, force him to circumambulate the open garden, to go around and around, to go around it till he died out of getting too tired. To carry the weight on his head and to go around the ground was not an easy task. It would force it upon him to act that way and reach his own death. So, such very interesting invocatory gods were put in charge of the protection of this city, and hence the city functioned with a lot of justice. There was a sense of fear for people who probably thought they could commit a sin and get away with it. It was being protected well by all these supernatural powers. So, wealth was in abundance, so was the security. People had no choice but to stand by the side of being truthful. And in this city, in order to please the gods, to invoke their presence, to bring them, to pray to them and to make them fetch happiness in their lives, they celebrated the god Indra. Indra undoubtedly is a Vedic god. He is understood as the leader of the pantheon of celestials. All the gods otherwise were under the command of Indra. Then you had the other gods who could command Indra, like Brahma, Vishnu, and above all of them was Shiva. That's a traditional setup. So, Shiva being the all pervading, and so he was there, and then he could command the other level of gods, the gods who were put in charge of creating and sustaining, and below them were the other devatas. And as a collection of these devatas were established, you had one person who could lead them, who could advise them, and that was Indra. Indra is referred to in the Vedas. Indra finds a lot of reference in various Puranas. Not to forget, Indra is described quite vividly in both the Purana, the Itihasas. Not to forget, Indra has been vividly described in both the Itihasas, Ramayana and Mahabharata. Literature all over India talks about Indra. The Indra Loka, which flourishes with wealth, has been described big time. It talks about the Apsaras, the beautiful dancers who were present there as court dancers, the courtesans of Indra. It talks about the high-raised platform on which throne, which is studded with precious stones, was kept there, which was used only by Indra, and how the other devatas attended to him. There was Devaguru Brihaspati, who was this wise old man, the celestial teacher, who guided Indra whenever he was in need. The multi-tusked elephant, a tusker, a white elephant called Airavatha. Indra also had command over the mountains, because the clouds which were commanded by him had to go and rub against these mountains, hit against them, and that was how it could rain. So Indra did have a command over several mountains. This is the description of Indra that we get. Indra in the Tamil lore is understood as the patronized deity of the agricultural lands. So we have the pastoral lands which were owned by the cowherds, the agricultural land which fetched in a lot of wealth and thereby a settled lifestyle, a very posh cosmopolitan lifestyle of the villages and the towns and the cities. So that population worshipped Indra. Then you had the tribes from the hills, the native tribes who worshipped Subramanya or Muruga. And then you had the dry, arid desert regions, which was populated by dacoits and bandits who worshipped Durga. And then you have the coastal region, which was populated by fishermen and people who made wealth from the oceans, and that was of course dominated by the worship of Varuna. This city of Puhar or Pumbuhar, which was the venue of the opening chapters of Silappatikaram, housed the mansions of great wealthy merchants. There was a lot of agricultural transactions that was happening too. So the people celebrated Indra for the bountiful wealth that he bestowed upon them. And this chapter later on moves on to describe every small detail of how the celebration happened. Indra is going to be celebrated with a lot of offerings, music, dance, Vedic chants, whatnot. So the grand celebration of Indra will be there for the next chapter. Signing off here, Madhusudhanan Kalaichelvan. Nandri, Vanakkam.